Hello and good afternoon. This is Jamie from Stonemeyer Games, and I'm back for another session of my book club for a crowdfunder strategy guide. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, which I titled back then, Crowdfunding is the Rock Concert for Entrepreneurs. And the question I have for you today, among several other questions, in fact, I need to bring up my list of questions while we're starting to talk here, is do you think that's true? Do you think that crowdfunding is actually a rock concert for entrepreneurs? And by that I mean that there is a buzz in the air, a tangible excitement with the spotlight on you as the crowdfunder when you are running a crowdfunding campaign. And is that good? And do you enjoy that? I kind of titled this back in 2014 when I wrote this book, and today I'm going to talk about whether or not that's still true. I think to a certain extent it is largely true, but does it even matter? We'll talk about that today. But first, let me pull up, here we go, Book Club, Chapter 3. And as always, you're welcome to chime in with any questions or comments that you have, anything that you want to talk about today. But that is my question for you today to think about while we're talking about this. So, I started the chapter by talking about the first crowdfunding campaign that I ever backed, in which an author named Robin, what was Robin's last name here? Robin Sloan. Robin crowdfunded a book that he was going to write, and the keywords there are that he hadn't written it yet. He was going to write it during the campaign. And so he wrote it live during the campaign and updated it every couple days about how the writing process was going. And I think he continued to write after the campaign as well. But he kind of made writing a book a little bit, not quite like a rock concert, but in that it was a kind of a live event happening, this thing happening in real time that you were a part of, that you were part of the creative process, even though you didn't know exactly what he was writing at the time. And I thought that was pretty cool. That was one of the things, that was my first crowdfunding campaign. I backed it on October 23rd, 2009. So nearly 13 years ago, I backed this campaign, and I was just enamored by how cool it was that he did this. Looking back, though, and I mentioned this in the chapter itself, the idea of creating something in real time is really neat, but starting from scratch and not having anything to go by is a very risky endeavor, and I would not recommend that in general for any crowdfunder to say, okay, here's my idea, let's start the crowdfunding campaign today for it. Instead, I recommend having created a significant portion of it, because what matters is not the idea but the execution, and then using that crowdfunding period to hone it a little bit and finish off that final 5% that you're still working on with backer input. So let's back up a little bit here. So the idea of creating in real time, I think, is pretty cool, but I think it's better to not start from scratch when you're doing that. I talk about a creator that has appeared on my blog a few times, a guy named John Rott, who he's kind of an interesting story, because in the book here, I talk about how he tried to fund his campaign for the King's Armory. There's a game that he designed that he's really passionate about. I've talked to John about this game. You can just feel the passion when he talks about the King's Armory. And his first attempt at it didn't successfully fund. And part of the feedback that he got about that, because John did something that I think is really cool, where he went to backers after the campaign, and I think he went on Board Game Geek as well, to people who hadn't even backed the campaign. And he said, what went wrong here? Like, why weren't you excited about this campaign? And most of the feedback came back to him was that the art wasn't what people hoped to see from the campaign. They wanted better art, essentially. And so John ended up running, instead of just rebooting the campaign and trying it again, he raised money to make the art better by using a micro campaign, a small campaign. And so that's part of what I wanted to talk about today. The idea of running either micro campaigns, mini campaigns, or humble campaigns as your first Kickstarter campaign. This kind of delves, I'm not exactly sure why I put that in this chapter about crowdfunding being the rock concert for entrepreneurs, because it's more about strategy than the spotlight itself. But I think that's a really interesting method of running a small campaign before the primary campaign for a project, so that you can use the small campaign to raise money for whatever you don't have money for at that point, which might very well be art. I think that's a neat concept. I haven't seen it used all that often in recent years. Usually people put any money that they have on the line for the art and graphic design, the preliminary art and graphic design, and use that for a single project launch. I think that's much more common, and I think that's also perfectly fine to do it the more standard way. I see Connor is joining us here to say, just listen to everything Jamie sends. I read it all. He reads it all twice. Connor also runs a board game company and is a game designer as well, and has some very successful campaigns, including the most recent campaign, which I think is the most successful for Connor's, which is Earth. And yeah, it's a really, really exciting campaign. I hope that game development is going well, Connor. Connor, while you're here, why don't you share what percentage of Earth was finished on the day that you launched the campaign? If you had to put a percentage to that, and what percentage did you leave open, malleable, pliable for the campaign and following the campaign to finish up? Curious what you say about that. But yeah, so there's this idea about micro campaigns, which is one way if you really don't have any funds or you can't risk any funds to get at least a few art samples, a few graphic design layout samples to demonstrate what your project, what your game will eventually look like. I think a micro campaign is something to consider. I use the example of mini campaigns. In fact, this is a fairly well-known game at this point. The game Two Rooms and a Boom actually started out with a mini campaign instead of jumping into a micro campaign. And they compared it to giving it a backstage pass. So they used the mini campaign to help people feel like they were a part of the creation process and letting them see a sneak peek behind the scenes of what they were creating before they did the full creation process, the full crowdfunding campaign for Two Rooms and a Boom. I also talk about humble campaigns. So this is a strategy that I think is still used today. So this is an interesting question that I still hear today from people. If they have an idea, a big idea, and they have started to execute it, say it's a big game that they're super excited to make, should they start out by launching that campaign, that game, crowdfunding that game, that big passion project, or should they start small and start with something a lot smaller? This is a humble campaign, starting with say a smaller game. We'll use the example of games here, but starting with a smaller game that doesn't cost as much money to make, that might be easier for people to get their foot in the door of this company or this creator. And I think both approaches are viable. But I think the key today that I would say is your excitement for it as a creator. Because if you are incredibly excited about the big thing and you're kind of doing the small thing just because you think you should, or you should test the waters of being a crowdfunder or an entrepreneur, while I think those reasons are valid, very valid, if you are not excited about the small thing, then I think people are going to tell. Backers are going to be able to see that. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. Your own excitement is going to be transparent in the amount of time and energy you spend in the campaign and what people see from you as part of the campaign. So if you truly are really excited about the small thing, I would probably start with the small thing and get that right first before going for the big thing. I have a few comments here. Bridge City Collective says, I think that's an interesting point. We, for example, are running a print and play for $4 as our first foray into game development. I think there's a lot of expectation that Kickstarter is a pre-order store and not used for startup costs. Yeah, that definitely has become the perception over the years that Kickstarter isn't so much for those startup costs, even though it often is part of the calculation for many creators. And we'll come back to your point about the $4 price point in a second. I would say that fits very well into the humble campaigns, but it also falls into something called micro pricing that I'm going to talk about in a second. Connor says, he says, I'm an oddity, I think. I want my games 95% or more complete when he launches the campaign. I don't think that's odd at all. I think that is maybe rare these days, but I don't think it's odd. I am completely with you, Connor. That was my approach when I was running Kickstarter campaigns too. Have the game pretty much ready to go to print with just a little bit of flexibility during the campaign so backers can still have that involvement in the creative process. Connor says, just proper cleaning up and editing and graphic design proofreading. He says, mind you, Summit, one of Connor's first games, Summit was not like that. Crowdfunding has changed a lot in 6 years. Yeah, that actually aligns well with the time frame of when I wrote the book versus what I'm talking about now. And Connor, I would say I like your approach, and I hope anyone watching this can appreciate that approach and consider emulating it, because I think there's so much uncertainty that follows when you enter a campaign with a game only 20 to 25% done, or anything you're working on. We'll continue to use games as an example, but there's so much uncertainty. Like there are so many games that I have started and gotten 25% of the way through and realized this game just doesn't work. It just isn't fun. It's never going to work, and I don't even continue to make it. So if I had put that on a crowdfunding campaign, I would end up making something that isn't really all that good. I don't really know that something is good or fun until it's much closer to like 60, 70, 80% done. Not necessarily in terms of the art and graphic design, but the design of the game itself. Yeah. So let's look at micro campaigns. So this was one of the most famous early campaigns was a campaign called Dungeon Roll. Dungeon Roll was the example I used back then. And we still see some campaigns like this these days. I think we see fewer of them. I think we've seen Kickstarter and crowdfunding evolve more into being a place to feature the big deluxe version of a product rather than the small streamlined version of the product. But Dungeon Roll was very much a small streamlined game. It was a $15 game, and it was priced intentionally by Michael at Tasty Minstrel Games, who was a master at crowdfunding early on, because he wanted to get that foot in the door. He wanted to welcome people into his company as easy as possible. And he didn't want to do that with a $60 game where he might get a couple thousand backers. That might be great, but he wanted to invite as many people in and capture their attention and keep their attention and hopefully keep their loyalty over the years. And so he priced this game at $15 on Kickstarter, ended up getting 10,877 backers. And I think this is a strategy that is often forgotten these days, and I'm glad that Bridge City Collective chimed in here because they have a $4 campaign coming up. That is brilliant. That is brilliant. Get people in there, get their foot in the door with a very small price when you're starting out as a new creator to start to build that list. You should build that list, I think, before you even launch the campaign, but to continue to build that list and get people in, give people the opportunity to trust you as a creator as they see what you make for them for only a few dollars, I think is an amazing strategy to use. One other strategy, I'll come back to the comments in one second, but one other strategy used for that I hardly ever see anymore. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any campaigns that have done this recently. But is the pay what you wish strategy. So instead of setting a price at all, saying you can pay whatever you want. If you think this is worth X amount, go for it. I think it is helpful when you do this to offer a suggested price point. So like let people enter a price if they want, but also have like a $5 or a $10 reward that's set and clear. So people, if they want to click that, if they want to go by what you value the game as or the product as, that they can click that. But also if you're going for this foot in the door approach and your production cost or a print and play cost are very low, give them the option of choosing what they want to pay. And you can get even more feet in the door by doing so. George chimed in to say, he's read chapters 3 and 4 in advance. So he's a little ahead of the pack here for the next chapter. But yeah, I'm glad you're a little ahead of the pace, George. I'm looking over at the other things I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, social goals. Social goals are something that came up in the chapter earlier on. Not quite related to well, actually it is somewhat related to the topic of the chapter, which is that the spotlight is on you during the campaign. This is your time as an entrepreneur during a crowdfunding campaign to really be a part of that excitement that other creators feel when they're on stage. And social goals are kind of play into that a little bit. So a social goal might be where you say, you run a campaign and you say, okay, if we get 1,000 Facebook followers, Facebook fans, then we will add this additional thing to the product. And so that's kind of tying into this idea of the spotlight of getting as many social follows and fans and likes to reflect how many people you're attracting towards the campaign. And I've experimented with that a few times early on during my campaigns. I have moved away from really engaging in that because, and I think it's fine if a creator wants to do it, but I think it's kind of removed from the idea of economies of scale when you're looking at stretch goals. So the classic idea of a stretch goal is you're saying, okay, if we are making 3,000 copies of this game instead of 1,000 copies, then our price per unit is going down and we can use that margin to add extra stuff to the game. Ultimately, stretch goals are still just a marketing tactic, right? But I think they make more economic sense when you tie them to an actual amount that you're making, rather than if you have 1,000 Facebook fans versus 500 Facebook fans. That doesn't impact your economies of scale at all. It's just attracting more people. At the same time, I kind of get the idea of using a campaign as an opportunity to pull in those fans, and that's what this chapter is all about: pulling in fans through choosing your pricing strategy to let people get their foot in the door, choosing social media strategies to get people into your e-newsletter, into your campaign, into your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram. And I think that is continues to be to this day really, really important to find ways to invite people into what you're creating and into your company and into your life too, if you want to share that during the campaign. So I'll talk about that a little bit in the chapter. And one thing that's very new, I list this on the email over here, is the idea of pre-campaigns. So advertising and talking about a campaign before you actually launch. And this is new. This wasn't around during when I wrote this book. So the big thing that changed on Kickstarter and now on GameFound is that you can create a pre-launch page where people can click a button that says notify me upon launch. And so instead of diverting people to, say, an e-newsletter where you send them an email when you launch. I still think e-newsletters are really important, but you don't have to do that anymore. You can instead send them to this pre-launch page where they can click notify me upon launch and then follow up. Automatically they'll get a notification when the project goes live. And I think a lot of creators now use that. They funnel as many people as possible into that pre-launch page. Connor, I don't know if you're still watching here, but do you remember how many people had signed up for a pre-launch notification for Earth before you went live? I'm curious how that number compared to the final number of backers who actually backed the project. Typically, those ratios I've seen are pretty good. And Connor says he literally just launched his pre-launch page on GameFound. Well, is this for a new game, Connor? What did you launch today? So GameFound has something very similar, and I think GameFound's is even better than Kickstarter's a little bit, because on GameFound's pre-launch page, you can actually offer stuff to people who decide to essentially enter their email to get a pre-launch notification. So for example, you can give them a discount if you want on the main reward. You can give them a little reward if you want. Here we go. It's Summit Sanity. Another Summit expansion here coming up. Connor, he posted in the comments here on Facebook if you're following along on Facebook. Let's check it out. So let's see what Connor did. Connor, we're going to evaluate you in real time here. So the Summit expansion called Sanity, coming soon. So Connor is able to put some photos of it to give people a tangible idea of what this expansion may look like or what Summit itself looks like. And Connor, I'll be your second follow for this campaign. It sounds like Connor literally just did that. He'll probably have way more followers by the time you visit this in the future. But what Connor could do, it doesn't look like Connor's doing it in this particular case, although he might be able to add it later, is if he wanted to, for everyone who follows the campaign, he could give them a special perk, a special bonus. And it could be not even money related. It could just be like a wallpaper or something like that. Some little incentive to get people to choose to say, yeah, I'll follow along rather than not follow along. And I think that's really, really cool, the way that GameFound does that. Connor says it's just a tiny teaser so far. Ricardo is also popping in to say congrats on the Viticulture World launch. And yeah, let's bring this back to Stonemaier Games a little bit, because back when I wrote this book, I was running Kickstarter campaigns. Now we have a different method where we simply make the product. Like we made this Viticulture World cooperative expansion, and then when we opened the pre-order yesterday, we already had it in stock. And I would say it definitely feels very different when we do this than a crowdfunding campaign, especially in terms of what I talk about in this chapter of having the spotlight shined on you and even on the project itself. Because on Kickstarter, there is this sense of creation. You're creating something that doesn't exist yet, for better or for worse. The for better part is that excitement of creating something new. Like you are bringing this thing to life with a bunch of other people who are excited about it. That's awesome, and it can feel really good as a creator to experience that. It is a lot of fun, I would say, along with some bad stuff, but it is also a lot of fun to see people saying yes to you, saying, yes, I am excited about this thing that you are working on. In the current method that we use, where at Stonemaier Games, where we just create the thing, there is still a lot of excitement about it. Now, I've seen it on social media over the last 24 hours, but it is much more short-lived. That excitement doesn't span an entire campaign. It really just spans a few days for the pre-order. 90% of our pre-orders come on the very first day when we launch this pre-order campaign. So like Viticulture World, 90% of people who are going to pre-order this for us over the next few days are going to do it in the first 24 hours. Even though it will probably be it will be on our website. Not probably, it will be for weeks and probably months on an ongoing basis. The only difference is, the key difference is the excitement for a Kickstarter campaign. They have that palpable excitement for creation. That's a lot of fun. But then it kind of goes away after a while, and it turns into anticipation for better or for worse over an extended period of time while you're actually producing the game. Whereas for the method that we use, that excitement is going to manifest rather quickly. It'll go from anticipation into the excitement of actually receiving it, because we ship it right away, or we ship it over the next few weeks. So people aren't going to wait months to get it. They're going to wait a few days or weeks to get the product, and they get to be excited about getting it to the table right away. There are pros and cons to both, for sure, but it's just a new type of feeling. And I would say definitely, as a creator, from a creator's perspective, it does not capture that feeling of the rock concert feel of a Kickstarter campaign or a GameFound campaign. But it is a different type of excitement to see that people are able to get it to their table so quickly after you have launched a pre-order campaign, if you use the current Stonemaier method. Okay, Connor answers the question that I asked about Earth. So he says, if memory serves, we had around 1,200 followers on Earth's pre-launch. So Connor did the rare thing, because I believe Earth ended up with way more Kickstarter backers. Let's see, pull it up. The Earth Kickstarter campaign. Okay, so I'm going to guess he had 4,000 backers. Let's see what he actually had. No, I was way off. Earth had 10,512 backers. So Connor did a rare thing where he took a smaller number of pre-launch notifications or notification requests, around 1,200, and by a multiple of around 9. He had almost 9 times more backers than those who signed up originally. Usually I see that go the other way, where it's maybe around half or 30% of the number of people who sign up actually end up backing it. Or I don't even know the exact numbers, but comparing the two, the beginning number and the end number. So Connor, that's an amazing achievement that you had so many people back that project as compared to those who were excited about it before you even launched. That's incredible. Congratulations on that. Christoph has a question that's not at all about what we're talking about today, Christoph. I'm talking about a crowdfunder strategy guide and crowdfunding strategy today, but I'll answer your question because you're here, of course. He says, will the viticulture crate be available in French? When? And the same question for Viticulture World. When, I don't know. When, you'll have to ask Matago. But if you look at our website for Viticulture World or the wine crate, you can see the different companies, the localization partners that have the wine crate and Viticulture World in their languages, and Matago, our French partner, is on both of those lists. They control everything else, and they control the information about their product. So I would recommend that you go ask Matago when they're planning to release those products. Connor says, if Stonemaier Games started to use crowdfunding again, would you use stretch goals or reveals? I think we would probably go with reveals. Maybe 1 or 2 stretch goals, but I do not miss. One of the things I definitely don't miss about crowdfunding is building a product around stretch goals instead of simply building the best version of a product and launching that best version from day one. And so I would strongly lean towards building the best version of that product and launching it, having that available from day one, and kind of doing more like the method of what I do now, where I reveal. So what I did for Viticulture World, I actually really like this method. For Viticulture World, I revealed, the day of the announcement, I revealed the rulebook. So on the very first day, you could have essentially all of the information about the game via the rulebook. But what you didn't have at the time was information about what each continent looked like, or what each of the components looked like on the table. You didn't have details about all of the elements in the rulebook. And so I used each following day to fully reveal those different components. And I really like that method. And so I think that would translate well to Kickstarter, where from day one, you offer the best version of the product, you offer the rulebook for people to see, videos, well, and that's kind of the tricky thing, because if you share videos, the people are going to see what else is in there. But not everyone's going to follow the videos. Some people are just going to back the project and they want to see those videos on day one, which I can justify totally. The difference, I think, between what I'm talking about and Kickstarter is that a Kickstarter from day one, you are essentially giving your money to the campaign if you're a backer. Your credit card isn't charged yet, but you're essentially buying it. Whereas on an announcement day for Stonemaier pre-order or Stonemaier announcement, not the pre-order, you were not giving any money yet. You were just deciding whether or not you want to pay attention, basically. And so that's why I use these reveals, these detailed component reveals in the following days rather than the first day. So, yeah, that's I would have to find some sort of hybrid method of doing that. Connor says, as usual, he agrees with me 100%. You don't have to agree with me for everything, Connor, for sure. You can feel free to disagree about any of the strategies that I use. I am obviously fairly distantly removed from crowdfunding at this point, although I still do follow it quite closely. He says, for sanity, we might not use much or any of either option, as the base game and the expansions were already stretched and we need components to match in look and quality. That's a great point. So this is an expansion campaign. Stretch goals, I think, matter even less for an expansion campaign because he can't do like component quality goals because he has to match the components with the original version of the game. They have to be compatible. The one place I might leave it open, Connor, this is where I might leave it open a little bit, is actually there are two methods that I might leave open a little bit. One is leaving a little bit of space for backers to think of something amazing that you haven't thought of. There's always a big choice there because it might impact the budget, it might impact the schedule, but there is always that possibility that they will think of something really, really cool that you didn't think of, and that's an opportunity for you to make it a stretch goal instead of automatically include it. Make that a stretch goal. That's one thing. The other thing that I've seen some campaigns do, I think Awakened Realms does this a lot, is where they have the core game and then they have the stretch goals. So they do have stretch goals, but all the stretch goals end up in a different box. So they're basically saying from day one, we are offering you the best version of the game, a complete best version of the game. You have that. And we're going to build on the side like a promo box, and I think they call it an expansion box sometimes, but it's essentially a box of promos. We're going to build this thing with you, and we'll do that together. So via stretch goals, we're going to build this side box together, and that way they have a box that is complete, that feels complete, that they've designed to be complete, and they can sell that on an ongoing basis as a complete box. But there's also this bonus thing that backers get, and that they can sell separately on its own for an extra cost after the campaign. I can see that strategy as well. It is a little bit tricky, but I can see that as well. Looks like Chad is popping in here. Connor says he 100% disagrees with me that I shouldn't come hang out at conventions with me. Yeah, Connor and Inside Out Games do go to definitely more conventions than Stonemaier Games does. Although my coworker Alex does like going to the conventions. He is at UK Games Expo right now, if you happen to be there and want to say hi to Alex. And I think he'll be at Gen Con as well. And I think he'll actually be at Essen this year as well, Essen Spiel. Sounds like people are going to look out for Connor and Inside Out Games at Gen Con. Watch out for Connor's hugs. Connor's a big hugger. He'll hug you unexpectedly. So be ready for that if you say hi to Connor. Let's see. Anything else that I have about the modern perspective on crowdfunding being the rock concert for entrepreneurs? I posed it as a question, I think, at the beginning of my chat today, because I wanted to contemplate whether or not that is still the case. It definitely felt that way back when I wrote this book. There were fewer crowdfunding campaigns. At the same time, there were fewer big crowdfunding campaigns back then. There are some that have gotten much, much bigger. Like we mentioned Earth earlier, Connor having 10,000 backers for a campaign that raised over $700,000. That's amazing. We didn't have many campaigns like that back in 2014, 2013. And so that's very different. That has a very different feel now. These big, epic mega campaigns where it can feel really good, I think, as a creator to be a part of that when it happens. But I think what we shouldn't forget, and what I shouldn't forget, is that it can also feel really good to have just a few hundred people support what you're trying to build, especially if you're starting out as a new creator and building something small and starting small. That can feel really good too, because you may be limited right now to your own circle of friends who are deciding to support you and play your game along with you. But to have even just 100 other people say, I'm curious about this. I want to try this. I want to try this print and play game. I want to pay $10 for a micro game. Or I want to pay even $20, $30 for something pretty small, to give that a try and give you a try as a creator. That can feel really good too as a creator. So I never want to forget about that. And I hope you don't forget about that either as new creators starting out if you're watching this video. A few more comments here and then I'll sign off for the day. Thank you all for joining me for this conversation. Connor says that Alex got a big bear hug from him. Ricardo says, originally, stretch goals used to be an actual thing, such as upgrading quality of certain components or adding something that was simply constrained by funding. But now a lot of Kickstarter projects feel like they hold off on gameplay assets and content so they can introduce those as goals, which can feel a bit dishonest, disingenuous. But and Ricardo, I'm glad Ricardo says this. He says, but hey, it's our fault. It's our fault as backers. Since we drive the market, I guess it's our fault for allowing this to happen. And I think I would go even beyond that to say that it is our fault as backers to get excited about stretch goals. I think that's a normal human nature thing to see, okay, I'm spending $40 on something that I thought was this, and now I'm getting this instead for that same $40. That can feel good. I get the marketing behind stretch goals. But at the same time with backers, I've seen the flip side too, where backers can get really, really upset if there aren't stretch goals. And I hope we kind of move away from that. I don't think that's something that's worth getting upset about, especially if we think the product that we're getting is really cool, as it is, as it's offered on day one. So hopefully I think we will see less and less of that from backers and as backers. I say this myself as a backer. Bridge City says the hobby as a whole has grown exponentially. That's definitely true. And Connor says, I think it still is, especially from the attention perspective, both on games people and companies. I think Connor's referring to how it's growing, and I would agree with that. The attention for the hobby is still growing, still expanding every day. I think that's definitely true. And last comment here, Chad says, I think back then people were interested in starting their product. Now it's to fund everything, the start to the end, leaving no inventory left. I can definitely see that as well, Chad. Yeah, and I think in terms of that idea of funding everything, sometimes that can mean adding stuff that that the creator isn't all that excited about. And I'll bring that back in now at the end, because I started off talking about excitement. Let's end with excitement. I think it's important for you as a creator to really stand behind, and I'll say this to myself, I think it's important for me as a creator to stand behind everything that I make. If I'm not excited about something, even if it's just a little part of something, then I probably shouldn't include that in the game. Like if it's, and I think back to the original Tuscany on Kickstarter when I did this. There were a few modules in Tuscany that I was kind of on the fence on about whether or not I was really excited about them. And I probably should have just left them out because they were the things that ended up getting cut when we ended up making Tuscany Essential. And so looking back, I'm like, you know, why did I include this little module in there if I wasn't actually all that excited about it? That isn't a good way to gain a backer's trust or to keep a backer's trust. So I try to keep that in mind to this day. All right, thank you all for those who join me live and those who watch this in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how you feel about Kickstarter as a rock concert for entrepreneurs. Let me know in the comments below. And I'll be back in probably 2 weeks. I'll probably do this every 2 weeks with Chapter 4. What is Chapter 4's title? We'll be talking about, mistakes. We love talking about mistakes. I made these mistakes so you don't have to. Well, I've made so many mistakes since writing this book. Maybe I'll have to bring some of those in as well as I talk about this next chapter. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.